This is part 2 of the Finding Internet Sources PowerPoint. What to know about commercial news. You hear varying stories about commercial news. Now, we know this. There are more biased sources that are available than at any time in history right now. Since that's the case, how do we know if any news source is objective or not? The information in the next slide is not necessarily the know-all to end-all, but it is a great starting point. So this is called a news infographic. And if we look at this infographic, this was created by several librarians throughout the country that came together and put this into motion. And this tells you about certain sources that you could see up here. You've got liberal utter garbage, and it says here that these sources should not be used. And up here, we've got conservative utter garbage, and these are sources that should not be used. If you see in the middle, these are mainstream sources that are minimal partisan bias, and these are pretty much the best sources right here in the center. So you see things like NPR, BBC, The Washington Post, New York Times, Reuters. I'll tell you about the AP Newswire. So the AP Newswire does not form opinion. Basically, every news source that you see here on this infographic starts with the AP Newswire. The AP Newswire spits off news, just fact, as it happens, 24/7. And with the AP Newswire, all of these news sources and other news sources that aren't mentioned take that news and they take their own spin on it after they get the factual information from the AP Newswire. So that's the start to all news. It ends with the AP Newswire, starts with the AP Newswire, and all these other sources take the story and write it in their own way. That's what to know about that. All right, so these up here, you notice how some of these skew to the left or skew to the right. It doesn't mean that they're bad sources. It just means that you have to look at the individual author to see, is this a valid source or not? Let's take a look at what's going on down here. So MSNBC and Huffington Post, they start off towards the center, and then they veer off all the way to the left. And the same thing with Fox News. Starts off a little towards the center, and it veers off all the way toward the right. And we've heard that Fox News is not the most reliable source. So basically, there are some valid stories that you'll find on these sources, but still not the most trustworthy sources to use. So take a look at that infographic on your own time on the still PowerPoint that you'll see on Blackboard. Then, if you have the time, and you probably don't because you have other classes, and this is a very stressful time, and it looks like I've just got a COD email, and that's what that little noise was. So you would do this. Just for the fun of it, if you have time on your hands, pick a liberal news source, a conservative news source, and a neutral website from the infographic, looking at your topic or looking at something on COVID-19. And look at these same questions from the slide in part 1 of this PowerPoint. And then you come to the determination, is the source reliable? Why or why not? So these are methods that are pretty much tried and true for these types of sources. All right, so let's talk about how to spot fake news and combat it. With crap. Right? All right. So fake news. So we hear about fake news. Fake news is not a biased source, not to be confused with Fox News or MSNBC, but these are actually not real sources. It is not news you would necessarily disagree with. It is not satire. It is not CNN. Fake news is deliberately constructed to persuade, enrage, and mislead people. Fake news works to create discord or mistrust of established institutions by spreading rumors or conspiracies that have no factual basis. And I'll show you how to spot fake news. Another infographic. So you're going to look at things considering the source. Click away from the story to investigate the site. You want to look at their About Us section or their contact information, and you're going to be reading an article about that next week to show you some of the tricks that these sources do, because we're getting okay at spotting fake news a little easier than we did in the past, but it's still not perfect. Read beyond the headlines, clickbaiting. So headlines can really open the door for some things that will grab your attention, and then you open it up and it has absolutely nothing to do with the topic whatsoever. Check the author. Again, author credibility important. Supporting sources. Click on those links. Determine if the information given supports the story or not. Check the date. Sometimes they repost old news stories, and doesn't mean that these are necessarily current. So they might repost an old news story, and all of a sudden it's going to surface and people will believe that that's what's going on right now. Is it a joke? If it's too weird, it might be satire. Research the site and the author to be sure that it's not meant to be funny. Check your biases. And I'm going to tell you a true story. So there was a guy that the president hired to be his right-hand man, and I spent hours and hours researching because I heard rumors that he was anti-Semitic, meaning that not only did he have ties with the KKK, but he actually hated Jewish people, is what the rumor was. And one of my friends said, you should copy this information that I sent you and post it on Facebook. I said, all right, I'll post it on Facebook as long as I don't look like a jerk. I have to make sure that this is valid. I'm not going to post something on social media that isn't valid when I'm trying to teach my students how to be valid with their sources. So I was up till 3 o'clock in the morning, and I had to teach class at 8 o'clock in the morning the next day to find a valid source that confirmed that this guy was anti-Semitic. I came up empty-handed. So just because I didn't like the guy or like what I heard about the guy doesn't mean that it's okay for me to use a biased source to discredit him. And that's also lying. I don't want to do that either. And when in doubt, ask me, ask a librarian. They're available for online tutoring while we're in quarantine. Or consult a fact-checking site. Let me show you some fact-checking sites on the next slide. All right, so Quora.com. So you would go to Quora.com, or you would just do a search, do a Google search saying, is such and such a source credible? And then it'll come up under Quora.com. Or Snopes. The thing about Snopes.com, a really great, important site, to know about this site is one of the greatest resources that I can possibly give you, because it gives you the up-to-date list of fake news sources. And it is a complete list of every fake news source that exists. They're looking for fake news sources every day, and it's a very extensive list, but very important to know. If you are not sure, if you find a news source and you've never heard of the news source before, go to Snopes and see if it's on the list. PolitiFact is another great fact-checking site, Fact Checker, and of course procon.org that I've talked about before. This PowerPoint will be on Blackboard so that you could look at the still images as well.